It's going to have a shadow on it, isn't it? Hello, Robs. We're back with Some of Your Blood by Theodore Sturgeon. And we got a long chapter here to go. It's like 29, but I think I can get through it. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about 29 pages as well. Let's do this. Frickin' spine. Got my spine, buddy. Now the thing that George wanted to laugh at, but he was so surprised at he couldn't laugh, was the one building they put him in first, had bars on the windows and no doorknobs, just keyholes, and a cyclone fence around it with 5 strands of barbed wire. On top, leaning in, and watchtowers at the corners, and a small gate in the front with no knob, just keyholes, and a big gate in the back for trucks. It was a double set, so the truck could go in one and get locked in. Then they would open the second. The whole time he was there, they never did close both sets, and he never did see anyone up in the little corner watchtowers. But what was funny was the idea that anyone would want to run away from a place like that. Everybody had a bed of their own with a clean sheet and a clean blanket and 2 shelves and a closet with a brown curtain for a door to put things in. Between every bed was a board partition so that except it was open at the end away from the window, once you were in there, it was like a little room of your own. In between each 2 beds, out in the long hallways where the open ends were, was a little wash sink. No kidding, one for each 2 beds, and hot water as well as cold. For each 4 beds, there was a toilet across the hallway and a stand-up urinal, and even if there was no door on it, who needs it? At night, 1 guard and 2 trustees watched each hallway on each floor, 6 hallways altogether. They had soft rubber shoes, but you could hear them coming all the same. First thing in the morning, big bright lights come on and everybody jumps up and puts pants on and comes yammering on out to wash the face and brush the teeth and go to the John. With the guards and trustees spaced down to the hallway with a pad and pencil to write your number if you horse around or skip the toothbrushing or forget to wash your hands again after you come out of the can. Downstairs, you'd go 2 by 2, no running, no pushing, and there was like a damn big restaurant, but with nothing to pay. You got to your seat and stood there until the matron, that was a fat woman, said grace, and you bent your head down, and when she was done, you sat down, and these trustees brought these big platters of scrambled eggs and whole buckets of hot cocoa to ladle into your tin mug. Barbed wire? George thought right away it must be to keep people out, not in. Maybe the dried eggs, because that is what they were, did get old after a few months, but how many times did he go to school or off to the woods with no breakfast at all? With the father passed out drunk and the mother sick and crying. Downstairs, along with the restaurant place, they could show movies in it too, and church and all. Then there was a barber shop. Pardon, I should get the... I hate opening the spine all the way, but there we go. There was a barber shop and a first aid station, like a 2-room hospital, and a whole row of what they called connies, which were consultation rooms for when someone wanted to talk to a guy private, like a doctor or a priest or a mother or some other stranger, and the kitchens and a row of offices. This was the one building, 3 stories high, with the fence around it, and that's where you went first. After a while, when they figured you knew your way around, they moved you to another building, and it was only 2 stories, and it had no fence. They had 5 like that, all alike. They had no offices in them, and only a couple connies and a 1-room first aid station. In each one of the connies was made over to a library. Each building had a real piano and its own ball team, and like that, with a World Series every year. Every day was school from 8 to 12, and then lunch, and then school from 2 to 4. Every day, half of each building had to work in the fields 4:30 till sundown or 6 in the winter. And if you want to know how they got the work done without any dogging it, each building had its own field and they kept score on how much corn or tomatoes or whatever each one brought in. And if you think that World Series was fought, boy, you should see them kids pull weeds. There was also shop training for carpentry, electric shop, sheet metal, and the bakery. Hello, Robs. Now, everybody in that place had to gripe because they took you for queer if you did not. But I will bet you the sweat off mine against the sweat off yours that not 1 in 100 of those guys lived as good as that where he came from. It was like the fashion to gripe, that's all. Also, to make as much noise as possible about how horny you were and where do they keep the dancing girls. George wished he had a nickel for every 10,000 times those little punks talked about women, but you had to do it. And somebody was always in trouble for making grabs at the pansies, or the ones they thought were pansies, or the ones they wished were pansies. Most of them wouldn't know what to do if a pansy said yes, even if they knew they wouldn't get caught, which they would. George really liked it there. Not that he ever said that. The whole place would macerate anyone who said that. Maybe it was just George. First of all, he was big, so he didn't get pushed around. Next, anytime in his whole life he had been with kids, they were all from his town and they all knew about him. And his drunk father and his mother couldn't talk English so good, and him getting left back in school and all. Hey, motherfucker, stop saying hi. It's annoying. You piece of fucking garbage. You gotta go. Ever say hi 43 times, you piece of shit. Thank you. Now back to, what book is this? This is Some of Your Blood by Theodore Sturgeon. In this place, nobody ever heard of him before, and all they knew was he was up for burglary, when most of them, all they did was their parents didn't want them or died or something. Next thing, everybody wore the same kind of clothes and slept in the same kind of bed. So what did they have to brag about? While back home, this kid had a bicycle, and that one new shoes, and the other's father was a personal manager at the time. Next thing, school. Any kid who was well along in school before he came just went right on with it. But any kid who was behind, especially kids like George, who were really behind because they got pushed one way or another, and not because they were natural born dumb. Well, a guy like that got special time in the Connies and a real chance to catch up with his age. George was really surprised by this school thing. He didn't know school was that easy and that interesting, too. He thought school was a place to tie you up out of the way most of the day and make it easy for them to catch you, whatever you did. Here they showed him things he really did not know and should have, just like just why it was the poles he used one time, like just why. What kind of mumble jumbo? I know he's trying to sound like a hillbilly, but Jesus Christ. Like just why it was the poles he used one time could lift a heavy tree off a deer, and also things he could use just as well as a figure four trap. Like how to wire 6 buttons and 4 bells so the buttons control the bells you want them to, and when to knock down bread when it was rose enough with the yeast. Last of all, why George liked it there had a lot to do with George, what he was, and nothing or nobody else. George kept his mouth shut. George always kept his mouth shut from when he was a little boy, at first because he was scared or ashamed to open it, and later because it was just too much trouble to get people to understand, and at last because he just got the habit. Now most of the people in the world who are in trouble are liars. The wisest thing anyone ever said about lying is this, that to tell the truth is the best, because if you tell the truth, you never have to remember what it was you said. Well, even better than to tell the truth is to keep your mouth shut. If you lie, someone is going to make you try to prove it. If you brag, even with the truth, someone is going to call you, and you got to make good. If you say anything at all, there is bound to be someone listening who don't understand you or who don't hear you right. There would be a whole lot less trouble for everybody if most people just did not talk so much. These are things that George thought a lot about when he was grown and not when he was 14 in that place. But that's the way he acted anyway. He kept his mouth shut. He never got the habit of running with anyone special either, so he could keep himself to himself. So all the time, if he figured out something was good for him, he done it. He did not try it out on nobody else, and he did not make speeches about it. So somebody could maybe talk him out of it. Because there are a lot of people around who can talk real good but do not know very much, they could win an argument about it if you should breathe. Anyway, you can learn a lot more with your mouth shut. You open your mouth, you block your ears. About some things, you should have some way to block your ears. If George was out by himself, he would not have to listen to all that talk about screwing and everything. Every day, every minute, somebody was talking about that. George had seen enough screwing to last him a good long time. He did not have to wonder about it, which is what most of those guys were really doing. At the same time, it was while he was at the school he changed from a boy into a man, and he felt it. He felt it more than he should because of all that talk. He finally put his mind to it and thought it through, lying in bed nights, and it was a long time before he got that thinking finished. But the way it turned out was this: being able to shoot your load. Oh, Jesus Christ. Being able to shoot your load did not make you something special because every rabbit could do it. Shooting your load maybe was more fun than crapping or peeing, but when you come right down to it, it is not so special because you don't have to make yourself do it. You can help it. You wait long enough and it's just naturally going to bust loose, like when you are asleep. You couldn't stop it if you wanted to. Just like sooner or later, you got to go to the John whether you want to or not. So it's nothing anybody has to work at or worry over, which is what all that talk does. If the pressure builds up and you don't want to wait, go get rid of it. You usually go to the John before you absolutely have to, too. You have to, too. But the number one top thing about sex is something that George always felt somehow, but only figured out much later when he was grown. He figured out that everything that is alive in the whole world keeps taking things in and then working them over and then throwing out what it could not use. No matter what a living thing is doing, what it lives for is the taking in part. It does that first, and then it works it over, and then it gets rid of the exhaust. Taking in is why it goes and why it grows and how it grows too. No matter how good it feels or how much talk there is about it or how many laws get passed, you can't duck the one thing that sex is part two, not part one. It's one of the things you leave behind you while you go ahead. When they got general science in the school and it come to biology, George memorized the line in the book, "No living organism can exist in an environment of its own waste products." And thinking about that and trying to find words to hang it to, he come up with this, and it finished the subject for always, that the first part, taking in, gives you satisfaction, and the second part, throwing out, gives you relief. There's a whole lot of people in the world sick and crazy too, who do not know that difference. They go all around looking for relief and then they get upset when it don't satisfy. Well, of course it don't satisfy. It can't. Satisfaction is ahead. All what you need to keep you going if you are going to be alive. Relief is what you get by dropping what you don't need anymore. It's behind you, and if you want to go chasing back to pick it up, don't be surprised. If you look a little crazy and get yourself stunk up some too. Well, George done his 2-year stretch and worked in the fields and learned to carpenter pretty good and to bake some. Come on, camera, focus. Get some and to bake some, and what he really liked was the electric shop. By the time he left, he could wind a squirrel cage, electric motor, or shunt, and he could solder real good. Not just wires, but pipe wiring, which damn few know how to do anymore, but it is good to know. And sheet metal, joining, lapped, or formed. Also, auto shop. Also, he was pretty good with math. By the time he left, he had enough geometry to measure a field or a wall-to-wall carpet, and enough trigonometry to figure the angles for a timber truck ramp, and enough algebra to last him the rest of his life. He didn't like it, or English. He did not play ball, but he liked to root for his building. Any job he could do by himself he liked best. He did not like to hold one end while someone held the other. From general science, the physics part, he got the word resultant. Put down a weight and drop a rope against it, and you pull one end north, and I pull the other end west. The weight will not move north, and it will not move west, but it will move in a resultant direction. direction, northwest. Now, when George pulled north, he liked the load to go north, not anything different. So whatever other people called cooperation, George called resultant, and it made him uneasy until he could do it alone. Almost 2 years and no hunting, and that was a funny thing because after they let you out of the cage, that was the big building with the barbed wire they took you to first. You were not tied down. You had to be where they told you when they said, and that was most of the time. But there was woods across the fields to the south, and if you wanted to slip away, maybe and hunt a little, you could. George just did not seem to want it. Well, they kept you busy, and there was never enough time to do all the things around the building you wanted to. Hunting, he just never thought of it. But then, right at the end of the second year, they called him to the office, and he said to himself, well, this is it. I'm sprung, but that was not what they wanted to tell him. They said they were sorry about the news, but his father was dead. He just stood there in the office and stared at them. Miss Dancy, the fat matron, and Miss Grasham, the big ugly nurse, although she was nice, and one of the typists who could see was horning in to see if she horning in although she was nice, and one of the typists who you could see was horning in to see if she could get a charge out of him breaking up or something. Well, she had to do without, as he kept standing there, sort of blinking and trying to percolate the idea all the way in until finally Miss Dempsey said, I'll tell you what, George, I'll phone your building and tell them to let you upstairs. Perhaps you'd like to lie down and think it over for a while. Which was just exactly 100% what he wanted just then, which was the good thing about that fat Mrs. Dempsey. About 8 times out of 10, she could hit it right on the nose, whatever you needed. As he walked away, she told him he could come talk to her whenever he felt like it. When he got to his building, she had phoned ahead, so he went right up, which during the day was not allowed, and fell down on his bed. He was supposed to be thinking things over, but for a time there he could not think of anything to think. When something finally came, it was like a weak joke. Well, if you're going to live at an orphanage, you might as well be one. He got up after a while and took off his shirt and loosened his belt and pushed the front of his pants down below his belly button and struck his stomach out over the buckle. He stood looking down at the stomach for a while and then shook his head and fixed himself up again. What he thought about just then was not the father squirting blood out of the mother's nose, or hollering drunk coming down the cow path, or standing like lost in the courtroom while they sent him up. It was his face the time George stole that first bag of groceries. His face altogether, with broken veins in the skin and mottled patches, and the dirty white blonde eyebrows and hair, and the 2 red scoops of his lower lids, and his little washed out pink and blue eyes, and all the snaggly, stinking teeth. The whole nothing mess of a face with all the messy nothing parts put together for just one lousy second, in a way that pleased George to think of, surprised and proud, saying he'd amount to something. George shook himself hard and lay down on the bed. He did not feel anything special, not even relieved. Well, his father had not been any kind of a weight on him to feel good taken off. So finally, because of that, it came to him what he was supposed to be thinking about. He never did have no real plans, just overall to learn a trade and be able to get a job someplace. But he never thought before the someplace could be some other place than the one mining town, or live in any other house but that shack on the cow path. The father would be there, and that is why he would go there. Now the father would not be there. So all of a sudden it hit him. Not hit him. It was not like a blow at all. Like one time when he was a little kid, he was over to the river, and he lay down in an old rowboat tied to some willows and drowsed in the sun. And lying there he watched the grain of the dry gray wood where once was a knot, and the way the deep furrows of the weathered wood swirled in and around and out of that knot. You see things like that sometimes, that though they do not move, your eye keeps going into and out of and around and back again. There are two spirals of hair on a cat's back that way. Anyway, he watched that for a long time until he got to know it well and half asleep. And he also got to know the feel of the side of the boat on his head and the bottom of the boat on his back and rump. And something made him sit up suddenly, and there wasn't anything around him he had ever in his life seen before. The boat had slipped the rope and drifted down the current a half mile or more. But what tore him like a big pair of hands, one pulling up, one down, was how strange it was out of the boat, plus how familiar it was inside the boat. He could not move for a long time except to look out at the strange banks and look down into the self-same knot-hole over and over again and feel that self-same gray board grinding his hip. It was like he could take all new or all old, not both. George felt lost and ripped like that on his bed, thinking about the father dead, because here in the school was the most real living he ever done, if living is going ahead into newer and newer things. It was here and now and real, but everything out there was all different, and like it had never been what he thought it was last time he looked. He got up off the bed and looked out the window. It wasn't but about 4 o'clock, a late spring day, and he had no place to be now until 6:30 anyway. And even if he did not show then, Miss Dempsey would not say nothing, not today. Even if it was all right, something made him be careful. He stopped halfway down the stairs to let two guys walk by down there and get out of sight. And then instead of striking off across the fields, he went to the hay barn and through it and down the way. Once he was in the woods, he felt better right away. Up here, it was mostly oak and maple, and he missed the ragged, shiny birches. Skinny birches, not shiny. And without the jack pine, it smelled very different. But the leaves were all new and not growed yet. Right away, he'd seen a red squirrel, but he did not do anything about it. A gray squirrel he might, but never a red. They can about jump over a bullet and duck down and peek up at the underside before it's gone by. But he saw droppings on the new grass, and just when he thought woodchuck, he saw the torn maple leaves on a new sprout, so it was hedgehog, and he cussed. He couldn't catch up with the old porky without he had gloves and a knife, which he had not. No knives in that place. The red squirrel paced him in the trees, overhead, yammering louder'n two jaybirds and a dry axle. Suddenly George fell down and lay still, but he had the right cocked way back as he lay on his left side. He never tried this before, but it was in a book about a gray fox in the library. The squirrel spooked out to the outside hair of a maple where there wasn't nothing but two leaves and a breeze to hold him, but he was held up somehow, and all the time chit-chatting and scolding and quarreling, fit to drive everything from ants to elk 3/4 miles. George never moved. The squirrel liked no part of that. He'd never seen this before and seem like he did not think it was right. He scampered back and took to hissing and squeaking and clacking his teeth together even, but George never moved. The squirrel ran back to the trunk and flaked off a couple scales of bark with his teeth and brought them back and dropped them one by one on George. One hit right on the cheek and eye, and he never moved. The squirrel cussed up a storm and ran back to the trunk and right down on the ground and stood there on three legs with one front paw on the trunk, ready to scoop back up in case. But George never moved. The squirrel grounded the fourth paw and shut up a minute and still George, or shut up a minute, not minute, and still George lay there. The squirrel came forward the way a squirrel, and especially a red squirrel, never does, not jumping, but squiggling along on his claws with his legs stiff, and his tail straight out behind him for 8-9 inches or so. He looked like he was on little wheels, and then he hit dry leaves that rustled and scared him, and he disappeared like in a trick movie, and there was his head peeking around the tree trunk, And now, when George did not move, the squirrel came out in two big bounds and stopped a yard away and began giving him hell again, and made one small jump closer, and George lashed down with that cocked right just in that split second while the squirrel was in the air in the one small jump. If the little redhead saw it coming, which he certainly did, there was not a thing he could do about it. George's fist slammed him down so hard, if the squirrel wasn't there, the fist would be gone into the ground up to the wrist. But instead, he killed that squirrel altogether, flattening ribs and all between them against the ground. After that, George felt lots better. He stayed in the woods for another hour, but did not see nothing but a brindle bat, asleep upside down under an aspen crotch. And who wants to bother with bats? He would have liked a large jackrabbit or a young possum, but this wood seemed to be fresh out. Anyway, the squirrel had done the bit, and that was a heck of a whole lot better than nothing. After supper, he went to see Mrs. Dempsey. She put him in a connie and went for some papers, and then came back with them and closed the door. Sit down, George, she said, because he had learned to stand up and wait. Thank you, ma'am, he said, because he had learned to say thank you and ma'am both. Feel better? Yes, I see you do, George. I'm awfully sorry. It's all right, George said. She leaned back and pursed up her mouth the way she always wrapped small surprises. She had black hair with a patch of white on one side in front, and round black rimmed glasses with a snivy fixed to them where they went behind the ears with a cord or so. If they dropped off, they would just hang, George said. I always figured to go back, but now I don't care. Mrs. Dempsey unpursed the mouth and smiled. How about your aunt? She handed over the idea like it was a chocolate-covered $1,000 bill. The smile went away because George just sat there. Wouldn't you like that, George? George said no. Now this aunt, the mother's sister, had put in for George a couple times before. The two sisters never did get along, and Aunt Mary was the oldest and was real mad that George's mother got married first, and things like that. Then, when the father took to drinking and things got bad and she found out, she would ask to take George every once in a while, but just to put on the dog or rub George's mother's nose in it, but not that she wanted George. Then she married this two-bit hillside farmer in Virginia, and more than ever, the best way she could think of to put her sister down was to ask for George, because it was a way of saying he would be better off with her, which was a way of saying she was better off. Now that the mother was dead, George did not trust this offer one bit because he could not see no reason for it. Also, George did not get along with Aunt Mary's husband, the little he had seen of him. Also, George knew the both of them would hold it against him. He got sent up for breaking and entering, an attempted burglary, and never let him forget it. But George did not say any of this because he never did say much of anything. And besides, he thought it was his business. He just said no. Mrs. Dempsey talked it around a whole lot, and the upshot was George just asked to stay right where he was. This was a big surprise to Mrs. Dempsey, but she thought it over and then said okay, because George was only 15 then, and his 2 years was up. But in another year, he would be 16, and the school could turn him loose without he had to go to no relative. George was wrong on a couple of counts here, but he never found that out until later. How could he if he would not talk it over, but just sat there? So he stayed at the school for one more year, and you would not know there was any difference. He worked in school and in the auto shop and in the fields, and rooted for the ball team and his building. Won a corn shuck, and George won the only thing he ever won in any kind of a race. It was eating blueberry pie with your hands tied behind your back. But there was a difference all the same. The 2 years, that is what the court said, and the court and the school had a hold on George. If he went over the wall, they would have dragged him back, and it would be the cage for him, and no movies or ice cream till hell froze over. But in this other year, he'd done his stretch already, and he was there because there was no place he would rather go to, although he never said that. they would have macerated him. He never did think serious of going over the wall, but if he did, it would not be like capturing an escaped criminal. It would depend on this and that and the other thing, like was he in any more trouble and did he have a clean place to live and all that. And if he was not in no trouble, they would have left him alone without even bringing him back. And somehow this all made a difference to George, and it was not a good difference. It was worse. He was smart enough not to let it show, but a thing like that is all in the way you feel. The only thing he did different from before was he slipped out into the woods all the time. He never took nobody with him, and he did not do much except once a whole litter of foxes, and that was practically an accident. Otherwise, it was not too much good because you do not club rabbits without you can get to a meadow edge in the dark to wait for sunup, and you do not like to set a real big deadfall or a figure four without you are sure you can leave it where no one can come and also get to it whenever you want to. It was nice getting away every once in a while, but on the other hand, it was never enough and it was never right. Like if you want something real bad, it is better if you do not get none at all than if they keep feeding you a tiny, tiny bit all the time. But the big mystery to George is how come he could go 2 whole years without even thinking about the woods, and all of a sudden for a year, he missed it so much there was a hot place in his belly for it all the time. And the 2 years went by like nothing, but the number 3 was like forever with its feet dragging. About the end of it, George got a message to go see Mrs. Dempsey, and he did. And she took him in her office and closed the door, and there stood Aunt Mary herself. She was a little woman, and George always knowed that, but not as little as this, probably because he got so big in the meantime. She looked like the mother, but not much. She had a very long nose that was always red at the tip, and he thought wet under that. And when she talked, she had one of those soft voices like pigeons or something, so she could tell you what time it was and make it sound good. George knew the minute he seen her he was not mad at her if he had ever been. She should have come the year before. It would have been the same. But how can you know something like that? Mrs. Dempsey had it all thought out what she would say and what Aunt Mary should say, and you can bet she had Arthur, Jesus. And you can bet she had Aunt Mary in that office a whole hour before to tell her just how to handle George. So once George was in, and he and Aunt Mary said hello and all, and the women sat down, and George said, "Thank you, ma'am, no thanks," and just stood there, Mrs. Dempsey took a deep breath and started in at the far edge and come around and around what she was trying to say, while Aunt Mary sat straight up on the front rail of the wicker seat chair, looking bright-eyed like a dog when you got meat in your hand and he thinks it is for him, but is afraid to say so yet. So in a way it was funny when finally Mrs. Dempsey got around to saying Aunt Mary still wanted George to come live at the farm. You could see she was like going to touch it, and then bounce way off and come in again slow. But George said, and it was the first peep out of him since the hello, he said, "Why, sure I will." Mrs. Dempsey could not no more stop than if she had fell off a cliff and was halfway down. She went on for almost a minute, explaining all about blood is thicker than water, and the advantages of a home and family. And the only thing stopped her was Aunt Mary got up and came over to George and took hold of both of his hands. So that settled that. And I think I'm going to stop there. What's that leave me with? 14 pages? Sounds good. All right, Pops. That's all for now. What page are we on? 52, about halfway through. No, maybe not halfway. A third of the way through. All right, Pops, that's all.